Hey, I'm Jill Deacon. Welcome to another episode of A Love Affair with the Unknown. For most of his career, author and professor Timothy Caulfield has been on a bit of a crusade against junk science, battling the misinformation that has really become increasingly amplified in recent years. Bad research, celebrity culture, and social media, need I tell you, hold remarkable sway over public opinion. Anyone who has tried to debate a conspiracy theorist or has perhaps given their hard earned money to Gwyneth Paltrow for a jade egg knows that. In 2024, the president of the EU suggested that disinformation, misinformation, and polarization were currently the world's most significant threats. You've heard the idea that we're living in a post-truth world. It's wildly destabilizing, really, to think about it. Caulfield is on the case. He has written many previous books, including one of my favorite titles ever, The Science of Celebrity, or Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? But it's his newest book that really piqued my attention. It is called The Certainty Illusion: What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. He says we have more access to more knowledge than ever before, and at the same time, less and less certainty about the issues that matter to us. Timothy Caulfield, welcome. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. And I mean, I saw the title of your book and thought, boink, got to get him immediately into conversation because I think a lot about the illusion of certainty, but perhaps in a slightly different context. So let's start at the title of your book. Um, in the context of the work that you do, what do you mean by the certainty illusion?
Well, there's actually a lot packed into that title because on the one hand, as you noted in the intro there, we live in a time when we've never had as much access as we do now to information and good quality information. We could get on our computers right now and we could access abstracts from the New England Journal of Medicine, from Lancet, from Science, from Nature. It's right there at our fingertips. But at the same time, we have never been more uncertain. We've never been as disinformed as we are right now. And never I personally don't think there's never been a time when lies are winning to the degree that they are right now. So there's that aspect in the title. But in addition to that, we're seeing, actors, industries leveraging that uncertainty to sell products, to sell fear, to sell brands. And that's doing incredible harm. It's doing incredible harm. So my book tries to capture, all of that, but also, talk about what are the forces that brought us here. Why are we here? And most importantly, of course, what can we do about it?
Right. And it's funny because both of those aspects of the title that you describe, I mean, one feeds the other and it's sort of this exponential explosion, isn't it? Because the landscape of misinformation, lies, and the rest of it contributes more and more to our sense of unease with the uncertainty of the moment, which makes us perhaps grasp more for something that feels certain, which is, and it's sort of exponential, right?
That perfect. It's a vortex. You're exactly right. Um, the algorithms that drive not just the social media platforms that really are search engines, et cetera, that drive our information environment thrive on rage, thrive on misinformation, thrive on creating grievance in order to create clicks and to pull us into echo chambers, right? And so you are exactly right. The more fear and rage and uncertainty that we feel, the more likely we are to engage with this information environment, and the more likely we are to encounter the misinformation that is going to pull us further down the rabbit hole and to increase our rage. And there's been, I'm not just speculating, right? There's a growing body of evidence. In fact, since I finished the book, the research has really accelerated in all of this. There's really interesting study that came out not that long ago that basically confirmed exactly what I said. Uh, Misinformation leads to more engagement, especially if that misinformation plays to our fears, plays to our grievances, plays to our emotions. There was a very recent study that really highlights this reality. And again, it's a study that got a little bit of attention, so maybe you're aware of it, but it found that 75% of the content that we share online is shared without clicking through. So think about that. I think there's a
Wow.
lot baked into that data. That means that we see something, it's a meme, it's a headline, and we respond emotionally, right? And we share it. 75%, right? And I think that is really important because that is our information environment. So our information environment is being curated and created by this emotional response, this immediate emotional response to a headline, to a meme that plays to our preconceived notions, right? So
Mm.
that's our world, that's our information environment.
And we so often feel overwhelmed by all the scrolling and stimuli that are coming in from whether we're scrolling it or it's just coming at us in one way or another that we often feel like we don't have time. I wouldn't say that I do that 75% of the things that I share, but I'm certainly guilty of having seen
Yeah.
an article about, I don't know, jazz, and I'll send it to my son who's a jazz musician. I'm not reading the whole thing. I don't have time to read all about jazz, but I figure he'll like it. I mean, we're just kind of operating at such haste. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself because I know one of your solutions is that we pause a little bit and slow down the ways that we respond to things that are being shared. But yeah, that frantic pace is part of it. And you mentioned the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet and things that are available online at this moment, along with all the other dross and misinformation. But even hearing those names, we historically have thought of scientific literature and science generally, scientific research, as being the port in a storm,
Yeah.
like the safe place where we can trust. And there's a line in the introduction to your book that you say, "We are adrift in a storm of information chaos, and we're tearing down the lighthouses." Like our distrust of science or our relationship, I guess, with scientific information is changing. Can you talk a bit about why? I know there's a lot to that, but you talk about partly about how science now feels incentivized hype, like they have to come up with a massive breakthrough in every bit of research. Tell me a bit more what you mean about that.
Yeah, this is an incredibly important point, I think, and more so since I finished the book, given what's happening um, down south, right in the United States. So let me, if I could, let me start with, before I get to your really important point you made there. Let me just start about that distrust, because I think it ties into something we've already talked about. So much of the misinformation out there, the goal is to create distrust, right? It's to destabilize our belief and our trust in institutions. This is an incredibly common strategy, especially with populist governments. But you want to create that distrust, and that's exactly what is happening right now, right? To create a distrust, and people often say, well, we institutions have to regain trust. They have, and there's absolutely truth to that. Institutions, public institutions, research institutions, universities, healthcare institutions, they have to reflect, get a sense of what they've done wrong. We've always have to strive to do better. But research tells us most of the distrust that we have now, especially in the context of science, has been created. It's been created and generated by the spread of mis and disinformation, often for political gain. So I think that's really important to recognize, up front. But you're right. The other problem in it is that research institutions have to do better too, right? And I've actually done a lot of research on, one of the reasons I loved writing this book is I got to reflect on work I've done really for decades. um, and there has been, there's a lot of pressure on researchers, on research institutions, to create work quickly, to hype that work, to overpromise. And I'm not pointing fingers, right? These are systemic pressures, right?
Mm.
The most well known is probably that cliche, which is true, by the way: publish or perish, right? It is a cliche, but it's one of those cliches that is oh so true. And that pressure to publish can lead to less than robust research. It can lead to studies that maybe cut corners. It can lead to the rise, as I argue in the book, of predatory publishing, which are these low quality journals that pollute our knowledge base. All of these problems, and there are many more, sort of degrade our knowledge base. And that's a big theme in my book, right? That we have to protect our knowledge base now more than ever. And so, yes, we have these disinformation mongers that are creating distrust, but at the same time, it's sort of a worst case scenario, right? We have bad science that's polluting our knowledge base, and so we've
Mm.
got to fix both of those problems.
The thing that struck me about that, and tell me if you agree with this, from the way I see things as someone who's so interested in our general discomfort with uncertainty, even though we all live with uncertainty in every aspect of our lives at all times, and we darn well need to get more okay with that, and yet we're not. We just don't like it. But it seems to me that we're kind of our discomfort with mess, with uncertainty, with unknowns is part of what's driving that pressure for scientific research. Can this please be the breakthrough that explains everything? We
Yeah,
want a clear, singular answer. And it's maybe what drives people to believe in conspiracy theories. The idea, oh, all this chaos of and so much uncertainty and unease and discomfort going on in COVID, and I don't understand, and what's in the vaccine and everything. Oh, Bill Gates invented it, so or Anthony Fauci trumped up COVID so that Bill Gates could put magnets on our back. Like something preposterous feels sort of singular and decisive and gives people a weird illusion of certainty.
perfect.
Does that
I
resonate
complete
for you?
100% correct, and I agree with all the above. And again, there's research to back up your speculation. That one of the things that conspiracy theories do is they give comfort, right? They give this illusion of certainty that this is what is driving the problems that are facing us. And there's some really interesting work. And look, we have to big caveat here, and I talk about this in the book. It's hard to study this well, right? Because you're looking at correlation studies and qualitative studies. But there has been research that tells us that people often fall for conspiracy theories when they're, for example, under economic strain. Maybe they're having, something's going on in their life that makes them feel very economically uncertain, and then they turn to conspiracy theories. And those same studies have found that, paradoxically, those conspiracy theories don't give them comfort. On the contrary, they pull them further into their grievance and make them feel more rage. But it is that looking for answers, looking for certainty, that is sort of the entry point. And we all do it, right? You said earlier, this can happen to, I've fallen for conspiracy theories, I've fallen for misinformation, and I study it, right? I study it. So I think we need to have, look at this with some humility. There was a very recent study, I'm going to say just over weeks ago, that looked at the embrace of conspiracy theories in Europe. And again, confirming exactly what you just said. First of all, they found there's a huge ideological component to it, right? And in this cultural moment, yes, there is, people that reside on a particular side of the ideological spectrum are more likely to fall for conspiracy theories. This has changed over time, by the way. So, it's important again to remember that it's at this cultural moment. And in addition to that, they also found that it's individuals that are, self-reporting that they're in a bad place in their life, that they don't feel economically secure,
Mm.
or they don't feel like their health is in a good place, right? So, yes, I think that people who are struggling and they're searching for answers more likely to fall for conspiracy theories. And of course, our information environment plays to all of that. It plays to all of that.
I was thinking of you as I was reading a novel just the other day. I scribbled down this line because I think that people don't just find what they what appears to be certainty in conspiracy theories. They often find a sense of belonging. And this line said, "You disappear into the library's science fiction and conspiracy section during lunchtime. It's the one place you feel safe." I mean, I'm taking that out of context, but it struck me. I thought, "Oh, I've got to mention that to Timothy
Yeah.
Caulfield because there's a sense of belonging and community that builds around these." And again, it's like we can dig our heels into the certainty. I know that the government's trying to trick me with this or that, or I know that this, big pharma or big whatever, excuse me, is out to get me. And I've got this community around me that they're also saying this too. And there can be a sense of belonging or community that forms based on, at the root of which is a lie.
So many of these conspiracy theories are really about community, right? And we can see this in a variety of ways. There's a really interesting study, again, the caveat, hard to study this well, where they explored people falling into conspiracy theories online. People have genuine questions and concerns. They go online and then they start, they become curious and then they start to get some answers. And then before they know it, they feel like they're part of a community. And then all of a sudden they're defending that community, right? And we see that happen absolutely with the political side of this story too, right? People might be attracted to a particular ideological perspective, and that's fantastic, right? Healthy democracies demand a plurality of views. um, then they become part of that community, and that community has a cluster of beliefs that you are to adhere to be part of that community. And
Mm.
the bad news is, once a health or science topic becomes about political identity, who you are, it becomes much more difficult to change people's minds, because when you debunk it, try to correct the science, you're not only just correcting the science, all of a sudden you're insulting not only that individual, you're insulting their community, right? So of course they're going to defend that perspective. You see that with the anti-vax community, you see it even with the flat earth community, right? It's more about my friends, my family, my community than it is about the facts.
Hmm. What about fear? What role does fear play in making us easy prey for misinformation?
It plays a huge role. I wrote a piece for the Toronto Star earlier this year where I argued we're living in a fear-demic right now. Again, studies have shown that if it's scary, it's more likely to be read, it's more likely to be shared, right? Playing to that fear, because our negativity bias is one of our strongest cognitive biases, which makes evolutionary
Tell
sense.
me more about
Yeah.
that. Can you tell me a bit more about the negativity bias? Because that fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean, for most of our, evolutionary history, it made a lot of sense, right? If something is scary, you want to remember, that's where those tigers hang out, right? That's where those, scary plants are. You want to remember things that are going to allow you to survive. So it's a very strong. And by the way, this research has shown this is universal, which again implies that it's hardwired. Um, and unfortunately, in the modern society, it's backfiring, right? So things that play to our fears, they're more likely to be remembered and more likely to be acted on. And increasingly, that's what the algorithms do. And of course, it's also, rage and grievance is a very similar emotion, right? So if you have, preconceived notions and also it's scary, that's a very powerful cocktail for
Hmm.
forwarding misinformation. Layer on top of that one more factor, and that's a story, right? We are also hardwired. Hey, you're a journalist, I'm an author. We know how powerful stories are, and stories can be, by the way, a very also effective tool to engage people with good information. But a powerful anecdote, a testimonial, especially if it's scary, can be a really powerful vector for pushing misinformation. You can layer on top one more example, and that is a celebrity. Have a celebrity tell a scary story and on social media, and you're really looking at the ideal ingredient for spreading misinformation. One of my favorite examples, and I know I'm going on a little bit here, but my favorite example is the misinformation about the idea that the COVID vaccine resulted in inflamed testicles, and I'm blanking on. I just reported on this. The hip hop star that pushed that narrative. She's very very famous, and she talks about this. And and we remember that scary story about the testicles, right? And not the hundreds of millions of data points on safety and efficacy. Um,
Right. Nicki
Nicki
Minaj
Minaj and
over
the scary,
Anthony
yeah,
Fauci every day.
her
Yeah.
friend's
Yeah.
cousin's testicles. I can't believe I didn't come up with the Nicki Minaj story. I use it all the time. But that's a really good example, right, of the power of a scary narrative to overwhelm our ability to think scientifically. The testicles win over hundreds of millions of data points on safety and efficacy.
Well, the celebrity with a story wins, as you say. Like those are really significant layers in this web of disinformation. If okay, so if certainty is an illusion, which I think we can all agree if we stop and allow ourselves with the discomfort of that, if certainty is an illusion, how do we get more comfortable with uncertainty, do you think? How do we get more comfortable with the messy middle of not knowing everything?
Yeah, the messy middle. I love that phrase, and I think part of this story is it's scientific literacy too. I think we need to do a better job early on explaining the nature of scientific inquiry. Right, this is a generational problem. What we're talking about here, and science is hard. It moves forward iteratively, right, and uncertainty is baked into it, right. And I think we need to explain that. I think for so long, and I think the scientific community and science communicators are, I don't want to say they're guilty, but maybe we leaned into these are the facts, right? And science is not a list of facts, right? Science is not a person.
Mhm.
Science is not an institution. Science is not a place. Um, Science is a process. And it's always evolving, right? And um, I think we have to do a better job also explaining the idea of scientific consensus. This is something I'm really interested in right now. Um, in fact, I just gave a talk on this exact topic. Um, the scientific consensus is not a memo we get from the Star Chamber, right? It's not a memo we get from politicians saying this is the meta narrative we're going to push. It's not a memo we get from big pharma. The scientific consensus is, again, it's messy, it's contested, it's always moving forward and backwards, and it really is hundreds, sometimes thousands of papers that point in a particular direction. And if you don't believe in the scientific consensus, we're completely paralyzed. You can't build bridges. You wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't be able to go to space. We wouldn't be able to build technologies that allow us to do podcasts. um, it,
Yeah.
that's the scientific consensus at work. But when a topic becomes a wedge issue, climate change, vaccines, the science around gun violence, when it becomes a wedge issue, all of a sudden the scientific consensus is, evil, right? It's a some type of meta narrative that's used to oppress us, when that's not
Hmm.
the truth at all, right? So I think we need to do a better job explaining what the scientific consensus is and
Hmm.
the scope of the scientific consensus. So, if I may, let me give you one example. There was a really
Yeah.
interesting study, and I do talk about this in the book, that was done in Europe, where they found I thought this is a really clever study. They ask thousands of people, what do you think the scientific consensus is? What do you think the experts think about the COVID vaccine? So the experts, PhDs, clinicians, infectious disease experts, people who have spent their life studying this. What do you think they think about the COVID vaccine? And listen to this, 4 out of 5 people said, I think the experts are split. I think, 50% think it's a good idea, the COVID vaccine, and 50% think it's a bad idea, which is just completely wrong, right? It's
Wow.
completely wrong. There's almost
Hmm.
uniform agreement within the scientific community about the value of the COVID vaccine. But that study really speaks to the power of false balance, the power of the middle ground fallacy, um, and a misunderstanding about the scientific consensus. The good news is, if you explain the nature of the scientific consensus and the degree to which there is a scientific consensus to the public, they change their minds. Now, look, this isn't a magic wand. We're talking about moving the needle, but it does have an impact. And we're starting to see these initiatives emerge. A colleague of mine has a great initiative at UBC called the Clarity Foundation, where they
Hmm.
try to do exactly this. This is David Sweet at UBC, and the latest project, he asked this pediatric community in UBC, so hundreds of pediatricians, do you think the current childhood vaccines are safe and effective? What do you think the response was? 100%.
Uh, yeah.
100% of the pediatricians think the current childhood vaccines are safe and effective. I can guarantee that most Canadians don't realize there's that degree of consensus, scientific consensus about this, and explaining that has real value.
Hmm. It's funny you're reminding me of when I worked as a science communicator at one point. I hosted a program at Discovery Channel, which sadly no longer exists because it itself was a great vehicle for helping celebrate science and scientific research. But it was hard interviewing scientists. You know, a TV audience wants easily digestible results and headlines and little sound bites, but science is cautious, and research comes, as you've said, it's iterative, it takes time, it comes with caveats and sort of subheadings and so on. And I remember very well the even myself wanting, can't the researcher just say that we've discovered a cure for this or whatever? And I know that there it was. That's the certainty illusion. But in communicating science, we do, yeah, we all need to be more literate for sure. Not only in real science research, but in the ways in which that is conducted. And what how you've said, somewhere in the book, you've said this, that accepting that certainty is an illusion sounds frightening, but is actually liberating. Tell me how so?
I do think it's liberating. And I also think that, just recognizing the degree to which there is noise and rage out there can be liberating, right? Because I think, first of all, it allows you to engage in the scientific journey. This is something that you've done throughout your career, right? Understanding that these things aren't definitive, and there is a journey that you need to go on. But I also think it allows you, sort of, this is going to sound like I'm being a little bit contradictory, but I'm not. It allows you to embrace those big known things, right? In the book, I often talk about um, the body of evidence, right? And we have a body of evidence. I work mostly in the health space. We have a really robust, large body of evidence about how to live a healthy lifestyle. Right now we're living in this longevity fad where there's all these longevity movements. You know,
Sure.
um, we
Peter Attia and the you too can live
are
forever kind of
exactly. It's
stuff.
always
Yeah.
old dudes. I have a theory on why that's the case. The women that are with those people don't want to live another day longer. But but it is there is this crazy longevity movement out there, and um, if we just recognize and embrace the known reality of how to live a healthy lifestyle, you exercise, and that's just doing stuff you love, right? You eat a healthy diet, and there's a huge variety of healthy diets out there. You sleep, you don't smoke, you drink in moderation or not at all. You surround yourself with people that you love and have a great community. There's no magic, right? And allowing yourself to ignore the noise, right, about all the things you're supposed to do to optimize your life, I think is liberating. It is liberating, right? It takes the temperature down a little bit. And the other thing I argue in the book is it allows us to focus on the things that really matter, right? And
Mhm.
not just on an individual level, like, great communities and just enjoying life, But also from a social level, right? What really matters for creating healthy societies and communities? It's not supplements, right? It's not seed oil. It's equity and justice and livable cities. Those are the things that really matter. And the other thing you want to do is you want to pick your parents, right? You want to make sure that you have those genes and those socioeconomic conditions that allow you to thrive. And of course, what I'm really talking about there is the role that luck and justice and equity play in our longevity. And I fear that all this noise and rage that is currently in our information environment is distracting us from those realities.
Hmm. The way I've been thinking about this and written about it in my book that's coming out is the idea of deciding what we pay attention to. And so that it's,
Love
to me,
that.
that's what I hear when you're talking about, are we focusing on, oh, did I take all my supplements and have I got the latest thing about the seed oils and the whatever, and getting anxious and bent out of shape about adhering to some celebrity's regimen or whatever it is, versus yeah, noticing how great it is to be on a walk with a friend or whatever. That's just sort
I
of
love that.
shifting what we pay attention to is okay. The other thing that you, as we sort of move all this fascinating and kind of heavy and discouraging in a way, um, description of how much misinformation is out there. Let's move to solutions as you talk about in the book. I mentioned the idea of pause. You suggest that we just hold on a second before I believe that or share it or even read it, pausing a little bit to reflect. And you suggest that we do that with your phrase is be skeptical, not cynical. Talk to me about that distinction.
Yeah, the pause thing, first of all, I think is really important. And there has been good empirical research on this. Colleagues of mine, Gordon Pennycook at Cornell and David Rand at MIT, have done studies that have found that even a brief pause, we're not talking about necessarily putting your phone down for hours. Even a brief pause, like a beat can make a difference. And this work has been replicated by other laboratories. And they speculate, and I think they're right, it breaks that sort of emotional response to the content and invites you to think of it. They call them accuracy nudges, right? It invites you to think about the content from an
Mm.
accuracy perspective. Even if you do that for a moment, it makes a difference. So that's excellent news. Also been studies, again, the caveat of hard to study this well, but there have been studies that have found that putting your phone down, stepping away from the noise does make a difference. It improves your well-being, it improves, your mental health. And that's like the idea of maybe putting your phone down at night and leaving it in your office, those kinds of things. And I know they sound very obvious, but they help your well-being. But I also think they help your critical thinking skills because it allows you to come at the content from a fresh mind, from a fresh place. But yes, I also think we need to be skeptical, but not cynical. So being cynical is not trusting anything. And to be honest with you, I have to remind myself to do this, right? Because I work in this space and it can become very, very frustrating. Being cynical is not believing anything, right? And coming at content from a very dark perspective, and research shows this happens. So if you teach people to and this shows how the field of misinformation is evolving, by the way. If you tell people to watch for misinformation and that you can't trust this, that they have found that people do get better at doing exactly that, but they just start not trusting anything.
They'll also stop believing
Yeah,
you,
exactly. Right.
Timothy Caulfield.
Exactly right. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there is nuance to this. You want to be skeptical and deploy those critical thinking skills, but then find those trusted voices and learn how to parse the good information from the bad.
Tell me just before I let you go how you stay sane in all of this. I mean, I mentioned you've been on this decades long, really, crusade against junk science. It seems to be getting worse. I don't think I need to tell you that. It's an uphill battle. Anyway, how do you just personally manage the chaos of the world, watching things shift maybe in the wrong direction? I mean, what's the Timothy Caulfield strategy for staying staying present? What are you paying attention to maybe?
First of all, it is getting worse. It's heartbreaking. It's really, I mean, this is an incredible moment in our history, in our history. Um, I didn't think it could get this bad. I hate to end on a dark note. I didn't think it was going to get this bad, but who would have guessed? Who would have guessed that we are where we are right now? Uh, and so I try to be positive about, if we weren't fighting this good fight, it would be even worse. It would be, imagine where we would be if we weren't all trying to do our best to push back against the noise. The other thing, I think the really good news is, you are starting to see, and I bet you've noticed this too, all these fantastic young diverse science communicators emerging across platforms, who are doing this creatively, who are talking about science accurately but in a way that's fun and engaging and not polarizing. I think this is just fantastic news. The other good news, we're starting to get more and more research on this. We've talked about some of it, today. That's good news.
Yes.
That's good news too, right? And I
It's
also
true
think,
because sometimes putting a label to it helps you understand. Oh, that's why everything feels so topsy-turvy, as t when you see that there's research about disinformation, even that can help to clarify your view.
I think you're right, and you see audience. Personally, I see audiences respond that way to it, right? And people are taking this topic so much more seriously, as you pointed off the top. The EU, the United Nations, you name it. People recognize that this is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and that's good news. That's good news too. But one of the big ways that I find, keeps me going, is the science communication community. We've talked about community a bunch already. Is amazing. It's supportive,
Mm.
it's creative, it's fun. We have each other's back. That's great too. And of course, I have my community. I've got my family. I've got my incredibly
You've got your
supportive
cats.
cats. That matters too.
Timothy, it is such a treat to talk with you about this. Certainty is an illusion. We're both trying to help people sit with that more comfortably. And kudos to you for the for your tireless work on this uphill battle. Let's hope the ground levels out for you soon. In the meantime, I do really appreciate the conversation. It was great.
Thank you so much, and thanks for everything that you're doing.